Your Steve Jones Show podcast is loading now. The Steve Jones Show podcast is sponsored by Sunbury Motors, North 4th Street in Sunbury, and Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf. Sports talk where your voice counts. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. Now from the Sunbury Motors Studio, here's Steve Jones.
Hey there, how are you? Wednesday edition of the Steve Jones Show, News Radio 1070 WKOK. And Sean Carey, Steve on his way into the Sunbury Motors studio. Sunbury Motors, Ford, Lincoln, Hyundai in the North 4th Street Auto Plaza, Sunbury. And Sunbury Motors Kia on the Strip, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf. Lots of ways to get in contact with us. Drop us an email anytime, stevejones at WKOK.com. We're also on social media. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. Twitter handle at Steve Jones PSU. That is our one and only Twitter account. We don't have any burner accounts around here. We'll have to check on Matt Catrillo. He may have a burner account. The one guy on the planet you think would never have a burner account would be Matt Catrillo. We'll get the vetting process going on that. We'll talk more about Twitter burner accounts later. Big topic of discussion in sports today. He said, Matt's yelling, you got me. That was a quick vetting process. Man, I don't get answers that quick in my own house, even for my two cats. We have some great NBA talk coming up. Dan Devine, NBA sports writer, Yahoo Sports, scheduled to join us at 3:35. Get you primed for the NBA Finals. Chapter 4 tomorrow night, Cavs versus Warriors. Now, as we mentioned a little while ago about a Twitter burner account, The Ringer has released a big report on Philadelphia 76ers President of Operations Brian Colangelo. And according to Ben Dietrich of The Ringer, Colangelo has been using several burner accounts on Twitter to do everything from promoting himself to tearing down his predecessor, Sam Hinkie. And that caused the 76ers this morning to release a statement. And we'll get into more of that next hour with Matt Leon from News Radio 1060 KYW Philadelphia. So we'll talk more about that topic. And also next hour we'll have Penn State men's basketball coach Patrick Chambers on the show. Pat, of course, and Steve will be taking part in Coaches versus Cancer, the big fundraising golfing event coming up at Penn State later on this week. And there is also some Penn State basketball news to share. It's not official as of this point, but looks like a new coach will be joining Patrick Chambers and his staff. We'll tell you more about that with Pat and Steve coming up next hour. So we're with you live till 5 here on WKOK, and as we mentioned, Matt Catrillo, he'll be anchoring the Late Day News Roundup at 5:06. CBS Sports Radio will be on with us at 7, and then tonight after 9:30, we'll head back to L.A. for more Philadelphia Phillies baseball. Game number 3 of the 4-game set between the Phillies and the Los Angeles Dodgers. Great performance last night by Jake Arrieta. Watched the Phillies implode Monday night in the series opener. Jake rectified that last night, pitching 7 scoreless innings in Philadelphia's 6-1 victory. Arrieta allowed 6 singles, 2 walks, struck out 5 to improve his record to 5-2 with a 2.16 ERA. So we will have Phillies baseball tonight.
Hey, they played great last night, 6-1. Wow.
Yes, Jake Arrieta, great performance.
Yeah.
Tonight we'll have another 10-10 first pitch. Then tomorrow, looking forward to tomorrow, will be Aaron Nola and Clayton Kershaw.
Yeah, that should be something else. Looking forward to it. That'll be terrific. And that was a great win for them last night. Meanwhile, the Pirates had another one of those. Are we playing tonight games? There's a game tonight, right?
I watched a little bit of the game last night and timed it perfectly to see that the Rizzo home run and the Cubs fan grabbing the ball, and they were trying to get a different camera angle to see if the ball would have fallen underneath the yellow stripe. Called it a ground rule double, but no, they kept it a home run.
That was a home run, and
yeah.
Then there was Schwarber hit one off the foul pole, and they had the foul pole mic'd. Ding. Well, no doubt about that one. No doubt about that one. We have, in our opinion, and it's usually just our opinion, a very interesting show. By the way, I've received a lot of notes from people saying that racing should be won when the car is moving.
How about that?
I mean, a lot of stuff on that. It's like, I know. It's like I said yesterday. I think, well, no, all the action takes place in the pits. In other words, when the car is stopped, that's when the action takes place. Lowest ratings for the Indianapolis 500 in 30 years.
NBC, good luck with that next year.
Well, actually, not really. Actually, that's good news for Indy. NBC and NBC Sports Net actually work very hard at promoting it. And they have the rest of the circuit. And IndyCar ratings have actually been going slightly up, slightly up, slightly up. The only thing that's been falling has been the 500, which is the one thing they don't carry. Well, next year they'll carry it, and I've got a feeling the way they promote it, it's actually good news for them. But it was the lowest ratings in 30 years, and the first time any passing took place happened to be in the parking lot when people were desperately trying to get out. I loved it though.
I loved it watching it as a kid when it was tape delay, when you had Jim McKay and Jackie Stewart, and you had a tightened, shorter version of the race. But when you run it live, you have the chance of having a lot of downtime. You don't know how many yellow flags are going to pop up. God forbid you don't want any red flags popping up.
Yeah, but the last 2 years you've had pass. It was exciting racing. This year, nobody passed anyone. And drivers lost control of the cars without being hit by anybody and just hit walls. That was it. The action was 7.2 seconds in the pit. In other words, the car wasn't moving. We were all excited. That's not racing.
That's the game within the game.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's the game within the game. I love that. It's the game within the game. Well, you don't get 500 miles sitting still. Okay? That just doesn't happen.
I thought of that last night on our post-game show.
Yeah. It's the game within the game. Guess what? You don't get 500 miles sitting there. Okay? The game is actually when you're moving. Oh, golly. Oh, you don't understand. Yes, I do. When they start and go 500 miles, whomever gets there first wins. Okay? Stop playing for points. Okay? Oh, no, we'll do really well. We'll get enough points out of it. The heck with the points. Win the race. I'm sick of these people playing for second and third all the time. Golly, that's not how I grew up. Okay? If you lost, you lost. You'd be amazed. Now, we have to get a couple of items in today. Matt Leon's going to join us today. Talk about the Brian Colangelo situation. There's Dan Devine's today, right?
Yes, 3:35.
3:35. So Dan Devine will be next. Then at 4:06, Patrick Chambers, new assistant coach for Penn State, being announced. And then we'll go 4:35, Matt Leon. Does that make sense to you?
Perfect.
Yes. So that's what we're going to do. See, I don't know about you. I don't race for second. Do you?
No. What was that famous Ricky Bobby line? You finished second, you're first and last place. Something like that.
Yeah. Well, now I realize the excuse is used a lot. I finished second for that digital media account. Okay, well, what? Stop laughing. We'll come back with more in a moment here on News Radio 1070 WKOK, brought to you by Sunbury Motors. When it comes to car buying, there's the other guy's way, and then there's the SMC way. The other guys force you into a vehicle you really don't want. The Sunbury Motors way lets you take the time you need to browse, ask questions, and take the test drive and think on it. For over 100 years, the Mertz family and all their employees have made your experience the most pleasant one you'll ever have. The other guys won't offer you the best price for your trade, no matter how much they say they will. The SMC way is their promise to provide you with the most money the market shows your vehicle is worth. The SMC way is to offer you all applicable factory rebates on new vehicles and generous discounts. Looking for a pre-owned vehicle? The SMC way checks each vehicle in a 200-mile radius to determine the lowest price, then beat it. It's the lowest price promise, just part of the SMC way. The choice is up to you, the other guy's way or the SMC way. The SMC way wins every time. Sunbury Motors Company in the North 4th Street Auto Plaza, Sunbury, and at sunburymotors.com. Selling more cars and satisfying more customers for over 100 years. All right, Dan Devine will join us in the next half hour to talk about the NBA Finals. Andre Iguodala is out of Game 1, so my theme of the playoffs have been more about who hasn't been there instead of who is, continues. Now, I've got a feeling Dan will completely disagree with me on that, but I'm still going to ask that as the opening question anyway, just to preview that. Let's get to college basketball. As you know, Tony Carr's worked out for the Hawks, the Magic, the Bulls, the Pistons, the Phoenix Suns. He's worked out for all those teams. There was no decision about him staying in the draft. He had already hired an agent. But there are also several players that Penn State plays against that are making decisions about staying in or out. Let's start with Maryland. Bruno Fernando, the 6'10 center, is going to go back to Maryland. But Kevin Huerter, dynamic outside shooter, is leaving Maryland and is going to stay in the draft. Carson Edwards of Purdue has decided to pull his name out of the draft. He is going back to Purdue for his junior season. Dante DiVincenzo is staying in the NBA draft and leaving Villanova. Kansas big man Udoka Azubuike will withdraw from the NBA draft. He's going back to Kansas for his junior season. So these are some of the decisions that have to be made by different players. Amari Spellman, I mentioned DiVincenzo. Amari Spellman is going to keep his name in the NBA draft. Now, of all the guys, I think Bridges is the best player they had. I thought Spellman was the guy that had the second most potential in that group, yet it was a real waver about him back and forth as to whether he'd stay in or out. He's going to stay in the NBA draft. He and DiVincenzo and Bridges and Brunson are all staying in. So those four are all gone. So the top returners next year will be Eric Paschal and Phil Booth for the defending national champions. Plus they added Joe Cremo in. So those are some of the news and notes from college basketball, because this is Declaration Day. Let's see. Nick Saban is tired of taking heat for blocking transfers. You know what? You keep wanting to give the student-athlete more freedom, more leeway, more freedom, more leeway. You know what? Let them transfer wherever they want. Okay? If they want to, if they want to go from Alabama to Auburn, let them. And I always love this, They're going to know all about our system and how we do things. Huh. You do know in the NFL, guys get picked up and waived and picked up and waived and traded all the time, right? Like in the middle of the season, it happens. You don't see in the NFL, the professional ranks, all that much concern about it. You still, the bottom line is, you got better people, you got better people. I mean, if the player you're losing was going to be the better player, then why aren't they playing? Just let them go wherever they want. Who cares? We get so caught up in, transfer. Now they're going to have to play against them. Oh, well, for goodness sakes. If you got better people, you got better people. Okay. I don't get all that wound up in it. And Bo Ryan's really the one that I think brought it to the breaking point when Jared Udoff, he had redshirted at Wisconsin. Bo gave him a list of 26 teams he couldn't transfer to, 13 in the Big Ten, and everyone in the ACC. And everybody said, well, why? What the heck does he care about the ACC for? Because we might face him in the ACC Challenge. What? Really? So he went through that little circus through all this and finally was granted to go wherever he wanted, and he ended up staying in conference and going to Iowa, where he had a good career. And by the way, during Jared Udoff's career at Iowa, Wisconsin made the Final Four twice. What's the difference? What's the big deal? What? They want to go someplace else, and you end up facing them. So what? There's a defensive lineman that left Penn State. He went to Rutgers. I was like, God, let him. There's another defensive lineman, Cam Carter, went to Pitt. Ooh, okay, great. I mean, both ended up as players. I mean, hopefully their lives are going well. But as players, they ended up being non-factors. I mean, it's like, guess what? You go out, if you lose somebody, you bring in somebody you think is better, just keep going. Saban's very strict about, and it's an SEC rule about transfers and so forth, and he says he's sick of taking the heat for it. Just let them go where they want. You know what? They want out, they want out. And look, Alabama obviously is going to get more publicity than everybody else. They're perennial contenders for the national championship and then won plenty of them. Under current SEC policy, players are unable to transfer within the conference without a waiver. They choose to do so anyway and don't receive a waiver. They must sit out a season before regaining eligibility. Now, not every coach feels that way in the SEC because Will Muschamp allowed running back David Williams to transfer from South Carolina to Arkansas. Look, just let him go. Just let him go. They don't want to. I mean, you certainly don't want somebody that doesn't want to be there. Just let them go and let them sign wherever they want. Who cares? If your program's good enough, you should be able to overcome it with no problem, and you should be able to replace it with somebody you think's even better. I mean, my goodness, you don't usually see starters, for example, transferring. All right, Dan Devine, next half hour, to talk about the NBA Finals. It's so refreshing to see two new teams in there, isn't it? Oh, they aren't? Two new teams? Oh, did I miss something?
It was meant to be.
Yeah, it was meant to be, all right. It's going to be interesting to see what the ratings are on this. If there's excitement about it because everybody knows the players, or if there happens to be Warriors-Cavaliers fatigue. I don't know. We'll see. That's coming up next half hour. Today's show brought to you by Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury. Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf.
Taking your calls at 800-795-9565. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. Now, from the Sunbury Motors Studio, here's Steve Jones.
Great to be with you on this Wednesday, day before the NBA Finals get underway. And he's an NBA writer with Yahoo Sports, Dan Devine. Dan, welcome. It's great to have you on the show for the first time.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Steve. How you doing?
I'm doing really well, Dan. These NBA playoffs, and let's just, I'll take the last two rounds in particular. Has the story been more about who hasn't been there than who is there?
To some degree, I think obviously when, it's funny to sort of think about the final. We ended up with a Final Four that was the Final Four we started the season with. It was the doubleheader on opening night was Cavs Celtics and Rockets Warriors, and so much of the drama leading into opening night was, LeBron and Kyrie, and after everything, the things that didn't work out last summer. With them and everything that shook loose, how dramatic it would be to have them squaring off against one another, and to not have Kyrie Irving available for the Celtics was obviously, it played a big factor for Boston. They were able to weather his absence throughout the postseason. But you would have loved. They certainly would have loved to see him there. And then from a storyline sort of narrative perspective, it would have been pretty great to see those guys lock horns in a postseason series. And then the other big sort of story of that opening night was 5 minutes into the season, Gordon Hayward goes down with that horrific ankle injury. So the big sort of launching point, landmark kind of free agent that they signed to elevate their wing rotation winds up not being able to play for the remainder of the season and in the playoffs. But that said, it also opened the door for guys like Jason Tatum, for guys like Jaylen Brown to really rise to the occasion and sort of spark their development. And they performed beautifully throughout the season and in the postseason as well. So in that series, to me, the story of sort of what would the Celtics be at full strength? It would have been wonderful to see, but the way the Celtics sort of evolved, I think, wound up making them kind of who they were by the end there, and who they were was good enough to take LeBron to Game 7 of the NBA Finals, and then on the other side of the bracket, of course, not having Chris Paul in the lineup for Game 6 and 7 of the conference finals was it's an incalculable loss for a team that brought him to Houston for that specific reason. They watched James Harden get gassed out against San Antonio in the second round 1 year earlier and realized they did not have another playmaker. They did not have another creator there to put themselves in sort of position to reduce his burden, get buckets on nights he wasn't available, and then you saw that plan working. You saw Chris Paul able to take over in games down the stretch of the fourth quarter, in games 4 and 5, and put Houston within one game of the finals, and then his absence just completely changed the math for the Rockets. And when everything starts going haywire and beyond the 3-point line, they didn't have somebody else to sort of settle things down and get a bucket, and it cost them dearly. But stuff happens when you get to this time of year, and injuries are a part of almost the story of every postseason. So we still wind up with the teams that we expected, but looking a little bit different than we anticipated.
Yeah, no question. Because I look at guys like Terry Rozier and Marcus Smart. To me, a really good backup quarterback in the NFL is a guy that for a couple games he can get you to the promised land, but long term is not the answer. That's why they're the backup quarterback. And I got to look at Rozier and Smart in that same vein with Irving out.
I think to some degree, Smart is it's weird. Smart is maybe almost more like, kind of like a chaos linebacker or something like that. Yeah. I feel like Marcus Smart belongs on the other side of the ball. But with Rozier, I think you're right. I think there's he deserves an awful lot of credit for the work he has put into his development over the course of the last 3 years to be ready for the opportunity. Danny Ainge deserves a lot of credit for seeing what he could be coming out of Louisville. At a point where when he was selected in the first round a couple years back, people really wondered if that was a big reach for him. He wasn't somebody that profiled as top 15, top 17 kind of pick, and people sort of wondered if Ainge went off the reservation a little bit there. But the kind of traits that Rozier had is a dogged defender, a guy who could shoot off the dribble, a guy who would put in the work to be ready for an opportunity like this. You saw that sort of bear out. But yeah, you get put into a situation where you're forced to hold up as the lead ball handler and creator against the LeBron James team, and especially when LeBron is going to do his darndest every time out to isolate you. You're the only guy on the court that's not like 6'7" or 6'8" and 220 or to 260, so he's going to make you defend him, and he's going to figure out how to orchestrate the chess match so that you're on the ball, and that became such a huge kind of game of cat and mouse whack-a-mole in that series. So Rozier, over the course of 7 games, of course, is going to feel that and going to bear that burden. You would love to have him available to do that for 10, 15 minutes of full effort a game as opposed to having to do it for 38, 40. And Kyrie Irving certainly just, as great as Rozier is, there's no replicating the creation that Irving can provide. And when you came down the stretch again, similarly to the Western Conference Finals, the Celtics were generating looks, they were generating three-point shots, but they didn't really have a whole lot of one-on-one creation in Game 7, and that's what they desperately were hoping to get from Kyrie. Sets things up really interestingly for next year if you see those teams at full strength.
Dan, now let's stick with the theme of who's not there, and who will not be there in Game 1 is Andre Iguodala, who missed several games in the Houston series. What does that do to the matchups, and what does that take away from Golden State that he brings to the table that somebody else really can't replicate?
It's a big question. It takes away a security, I think, to some degree for Golden State. When they get into trouble, it's when they're throwing the ball over the place, when they're getting a little bit too cute with their passing, when they are trying to make a home run play as opposed to kind of staying on schedule. And he's a guy who really helps settle them down in their, when they're working in the half court. He's not a great shooter, but he's a guy that can make jump shots. He's a guy who, when defenses ignore him, is smart enough to understand where to put himself on the floor with, off-ball cuts and making himself into a screener and those sorts of things to be able to kind of keep the offense flowing. So I think you saw a lot of times later in that series against Houston, Golden State's offense, as for all the talent they have, would tend to kind of gum up, and it would wind up being, Durant isolations or Steph Curry kind of trying to pop loose 30 feet away from the basket and not a whole lot of flow. And they're at their best when he's out there as a supplementary creator and sort of guy keeping the ball moving. And then on the defensive end, he won it Finals MVP a few years ago for his on-ball defense on LeBron James. He's not quite that guy anymore, but he's still an incredibly versatile defender, a guy who would be, in all likelihood, get the first if they were going to start that lineup, at least start the lineup where he plays. Draymond plays center and they play small, that Hamptons 5 lineup, would probably get the first crack on LeBron. It'll require more from Kevin Durant defensively on the primary matchup there. It'll require more from Draymond Green, making it more difficult for him to be kind of the rover, free safety, game plan record that he can be. It complicates things. It makes them sweat. And LeBron is when you give him an opening, he's going to go right through it and get to the rim. So I think it doesn't necessarily tilt the scales in Cleveland's favor necessarily, but I think it does create. It levels the playing field a little bit here and creates some concern about how Golden State's going to match up defensively on LeBron over the course of this for the first game here. And then if he's limited or unable to return after that, it kind of engenders bigger questions. And hey, listen, if Cleveland is able to go in there and get Game 1, then we're talking about a very, very different series.
No question, Dan. And what are your thoughts on the Cavaliers remake? I'll do this in 2 parts. What did you think at the trade deadline, how they remade the team? And now a couple of months later, what are your thoughts on it?
I really liked the move at the trade deadline, if for no other reason than it had become pretty obvious that the Isaiah Thomas experiment was not going to work out. It had run its course, and it was not going to generate anything really positive for Cleveland this season. You understood the idea, certainly. If Kyrie wants out, you got to get somebody, something of value for him, and the combination of an all-star point guard, the guy with an all-star ceiling in Isaiah Thomas, and a lottery pick from the unprotected from the Brooklyn Nets. It was about as good of a return as you were going to get in that situation. But at the trade deadline, it seemed like you move him, you get back at least some sort of athleticism. Larry Nance Jr. being a guy who can run the floor, fill the lane, finish above the rim, pick and roll kind of player, and a guy who's active defensively. Jordan Clarkson is a trick or treat kind of guy who could score in bunches, handle the ball a little bit. George Hill, I loved the idea of getting another sort of caretaker point guard who could shoot the three and defend a little bit. In practice, it hasn't worked out nearly as cleanly as I think I and a lot of other people thought. They're not getting Clarkson has been a real tough player for them to play over the course of the postseason because of his defensive liabilities and the fact that he's just going to jack it almost constantly as soon as he gets on the floor every time he gets the ball. And Hill has been hit or miss as far as his contributions, but when he's good, he really elevates that team as another shooter, another driver, a guy who can sort of create something that doesn't have to come from LeBron. So I think you've seen some of the positives come to bear. You've seen Larry Nance's energy change things. For possessions at a time, provide a real jolt off the bench, and that's been a positive thing for Ty Lue from time to time. But certainly, you haven't seen those guys be like real game-breaking figures. Maybe the biggest thing you got, though, in that situation was you sort of exercised the demons in the locker room, and you got maybe the most committed. You got a recommitted LeBron James, and as we've seen to this point, that's really the biggest difference maker that there is in the Eastern Conference. Because when you've got him on all, locked in and firing on all cylinders, we haven't yet seen the team that's going to be able to stop that.
LeBron James has not missed a single game this season. He played all 82 regular season games, every game in the playoffs, and so forth. What have you thought of his performance the last 4 weeks?
It makes me, it's beyond belief. It's kind of staggering that he is, with whatever, I forget the running total now. I believe it's well over 54,000 career total minutes if you add in regular season and postseason. To be performing at this level, this deep into a season, this deep into his career at age 33, is just we've never seen anything like it, and it's. There will be plenty of time. I can't even say that. There will be plenty of time for evaluating legacy and things like that after it's over. But of course, everyone will continue to evaluate legacy and whatever as we go along, because that's sort of the cottage industry that's sprung up around him over the years. But it is, being able to take all the sort of chaos and absurdity that has surrounded the Cavs this season, and the negative, the number of negative performing players that they've had and had to sort of juggle, which he bears some responsibility for, because considering the way he's, the pressure he's put on the team to sign guys like Tristan Thompson and J.R. Smith to big money contracts to keep the band back together and so on and so forth. But it's and whatever responsibility he might have for Kyrie Irving's situation going south in the way that it did. It's not that he's a self-negating angel in this situation, but he, at the end of the day, this is the roster they have, and he's had to carry it, and he has done it, and he's done it in a way that is like efficient and remarkable. I feel like if you're watching him play at this point and you're finding nits to pick, you're just, you're missing the forest for the trees, and you're missing the forest for like a tiny shrub down in the bottom left corner of the screen when there's so much else you could be paying attention to. But whether that's going to be enough to get more than one game against this Warriors team, I don't know. But I think what we've seen so far has been pretty impressive.
How does Steve Kerr like to play this? I mean, this will be the 4th straight series that we've seen this play out. Does he like to play LeBron straight up, or does he get more concerned about the other 4 guys?
I think they like to play LeBron straight up as best they can. I think there's sort of a general idea that if LeBron goes for 50 on you, that's not fun. But what you really don't want is LeBron to go for 40 and then assist on 30. You don't want him to be able to draw and kick and activate those shooters and get J.R. Smith in rhythm and popping for 15 points. You don't want Kyle Korver to get 16 or 17 on only a handful of shots because he's getting clean looks away from the ball. You'll live with Tristan Thompson finishing plays around the rim, or you'll live with finishing in the pick and roll if that means that you're able to stay at home on the other shooters, and you'll live with LeBron trying to bulldoze his way past Iguodala, past Durant, past Draymond, whatever other big men they can throw at him, whatever bodies they can put out there to try to make him work for 46 minutes or however long he's going to wind up playing in these games, because the feeling is like if he's going to do that and he's going to score 50 points, then it's going to take it out of him. You're going to be able to get it back on the other end. Kevin Durant's going to win Finals MVP because he's going to score 38 points a game, right, with LeBron giving it back on the other end. And we think we've got enough on with our other offensive options to be able to win that game, so long as we're not letting them shoot make 15, 16 threes and getting everybody else going. So I would imagine if you're a coach, it is not necessarily a fun game plan to watch unfold, because there has to be every erg of you saying, like, we got to stop him from going to the basket, bring the double, bring the double, bring the double. But as soon as you do that, as soon as you bring the help, he's so smart and he's so big to see over the top of the defenses, he finds the open shooter every time. And, when those three start adding up, they become a whole different team to handle. And I think that Kerr is going to look and say, we've got to limit that at all costs.
Okay, Dan, final question. I appreciate the time very much. This has been a lot of fun. Give me an X factor on each team, and an X factor could be a starter. So give me an X factor on each team that you think might be swing guys beyond obvious. We know who the stars are.
Sure.
Who's under the radar that can help?
Well, I think that you're going to for the Warriors. To me, I mean, the sort of eternal answer for the Warriors is Klay Thompson, because when he is able to provide,
that was mine.
Yeah, when he's able to pop loose and really get going, it takes their offense to a different level. But beyond that, I mean, with Iguodala out, I think, and a really important player will be Sean Livingston, another guy who sort of fills in that. Can defend multiple positions, can handle the ball, dump the ball into the post against smaller defenders and let him kind of, work that turnaround jumper that seems to, go in 95% of the time. But a guy who can sort of, and who's been there throughout this run and been sort of a big part of what they do, as a stabilizing agent, that can, get a few buckets here or there, stall some possessions out. So I think when he's been good, when he's been able to handle some of those minutes, the Warriors become a lot tougher to beat. And when they haven't been able to find that sort of stabilizing agent, the guy to calm things and settle things down, things can kind of get out of hand for them. And then for Cleveland, J.R. Smith is a big one for me, because when you see J.R. at sort of the peak of his attention and capacity, he can be a really engaged defender. He can make scorers work. He can make life tough on, even really, really good players like Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. He can make them work for their offense. And when he gets a couple to go through, he can put 5 or 6 in a heartbeat. He's a big two guard. He's a capable ball handler. He's a guy who can screen for LeBron in some of those sets that they like to run to get LeBron matched up on a smaller point guard or a guy that he can bully a little bit. So JR is when they get the best version of him, Cleveland's offense sort of raises up a level. And when they get bad JR, when he is, providing nothing, it's about as bad as Cleveland can look. So to me, he's a big bellwether for them, and I would imagine LeBron's going to do everything he can to kind of get him going early.
You picked the two I would have picked. Dan, thanks so much. Appreciate the time. It was a lot of fun. Great information. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, Steve. Thanks a lot.
Dan Devine, Yahoo Sports, NBA writer, does great work. That was great analysis as well. We'll come back, and don't forget Patrick Chambers next half hour, and Matt Leon on the Brian Colangelo situation in the final half hour as we continue on News Radio 1070 WKOK.